Sound of a twig snapping underfoot, a shadow stretching across manicured grass, a smug smirk, then a low, guttural click. The screen flashes, busted. A single chilling laugh echoes, not from the intruder but from the darkness watching. The late afternoon sun, usually a comforting balm, felt like a spotlight on Ethan's back as he knelt in his meticulously maintained garden. His fingers, calloused but gentle, worked the rich soil around a newly planted heirloom tomato. Each leaf, each budding flower in his half-acre suburban oasis was a testament to countless hours, sweat, and a quiet, almost desperate yearning for peace. For 2 years, this backyard had been his sanctuary, his canvas, his defiant refusal to let the chaos of the outside world, and specifically one particularly aggressive neighbor, infiltrate his haven. But peace, like the delicate petals of his prize-winning roses, was fragile. Ethan straightened, a dull ache in his lower back a familiar companion. He glanced towards the imposing, if slightly overgrown, hedge that marked the boundary between his property and the kingdom of Karen Albright. The hedge was supposed to be a deterrent, a leafy living wall that whispered private property. For most, it worked. For Karen, it was merely a suggestion, a flimsy green veil that she felt entitled to peer through and increasingly to push past. Karen. The name itself was a tightly coiled spring in Ethan's gut. She wasn't just a neighbor, she was an event, a force of nature fueled by self-importance and a bottomless well of righteous indignation. Their feud had started innocuously enough, a misplaced garden gnome, a complaint about his compost smell, which Ethan firmly believed was earthy and natural, not a biohazard, and then the infamous incident of the stolen zucchini. Ethan had shrugged off the gnome, appeased the compost complaints with promises of aeration, but the zucchini, that had been a line. "It's just a zucchini, Ethan," his sister, Sarah, had laughed when he recounted the tale. "Let it go." But it wasn't just a zucchini. It was the principle. It was the blatant disregard for boundaries, the casual entitlement that grated on his last nerve. And it had escalated. From petty theft, it moved to surveillance. He'd catch her silhouette through his kitchen window, peering over the hedge, a pair of cheap binoculars glued to her face. Then came the accidental lawnmower incidents, where her ancient machine would inexplicably veer onto his manicured grass, carving haphazard stripes before she'd offer a saccharine, insincere apology. Ethan had tried reason. He'd tried polite notes. He'd even consulted a lawyer who advised him on property lines and the futility of civil suits over garden produce. "Best to just put up a taller fence, Mr. Vance," the lawyer had advised, a weary sigh in his voice. "Some people just aren't worth the headache." But Ethan was tired of being the one to back down, the one to absorb the headache. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about his own peace of mind, his right to feel secure in his own home. He wasn't a confrontational man by nature. He preferred quiet evenings, the company of books, and the gentle hum of nature in his garden. But even a worm would turn. The idea had come to him on a particularly frustrating Tuesday after finding a series of perfectly round, golf ball-sized divots in his prize-winning petunias, divots that suspiciously resembled the impact points of Karen's dog's tennis balls retrieved from her yard with a forceful overhand throw. It wasn't just careless. It felt deliberate, a challenge. "She wants a war," he'd muttered, staring at the flattened petunias. "Then she's going to get one. But not a war of words or legal letters. A war of ingenuity." He spent weeks planning, late nights in his shed, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and determination. He wasn't building something to harm her, no. That wasn't his style. He was building something to expose her, to make her entitlement visible, undeniable, and utterly humiliating. He wanted a trap that didn't just catch her. It caught her in the act, in a way that left no room for denial, no space for her usual bluster and victimhood. The first few ideas were too simple. A tripwire that set off an alarm? She'd just claim it was a faulty sensor. A motion-activated sprinkler? Annoying, but easily dismissed. No, this needed to be more elegant, more theatrical. It needed a twist. He thought about her patterns, her favorite routes through the hedge, usually near the old oak tree where the branches dipped low. Her preferred times? Dusk, when she thought. She was less visible, or mid-morning, when she assumed he was at work. He considered her motivation, often a misplaced item, a perceived injustice, or simply the urge to assert dominance. His gaze fell on the old, unused well in the corner of his yard, covered by a heavy, almost forgotten wrought iron grate. It was dry, thank goodness, but deep enough to be unsettling. An image sparked in his mind, Karen, caught, not in the well itself, but around it. The idea began to crystallize. He purchased materials in obscure hardware stores in neighboring towns, paid in cash, and transported them under the cover of night. He studied engineering diagrams, learned about pressure plates and counterweights. He rigged a discreet, motion-activated camera system, not just for evidence, but for the unveiling. This wouldn't be a private triumph. It would be a public one, at least to those who mattered. The trap itself was a marvel of passive engineering. It leveraged Karen's predictable behavior and her utter lack of awareness. Near the hedge, he reinforced a section of his fence, installing a small, almost invisible gate that he left strategically unlatched, its hinges subtly greased for silent operation. This was her usual entry point. Beyond it, within the shadowed embrace of the oak tree, he constructed a raised platform disguised expertly with artificial turf and decorative planters. It blended seamlessly with the natural landscape. The platform was designed to look like a slight elevation, a natural rise in the garden bed. But underneath, it concealed a simple yet effective mechanism. A pressure plate, precisely placed, was connected to a counterweight system. When a certain amount of weight was applied, say the weight of an average adult woman, it would trigger two things simultaneously. First, it would activate a small, powerful, high-definition camera nestled covertly within a birdhouse that would begin recording. The footage would be time-stamped and beamed directly to a cloud server, ensuring immediate and irrefutable evidence. Second, and far more theatrical, it would trigger a release. Not of water, not of paint, but something far more informative. He tested it endlessly, using sandbags and even his own weight, adjusting the sensitivity, ensuring the mechanism was silent, swift, and utterly foolproof. Each successful test brought a grim satisfaction. This wasn't about violence. It was about undeniable proof, about a public reckoning. He finished the setup late one Saturday night, the moon a sliver above, casting long, deceptive shadows. He stood back, admiring his handiwork. From casual glance, it was just part of his garden, albeit a slightly more elevated part. The artificial turf felt realistic. The planters looked natural. He connected the final wires, checked the camera feed on his phone. Perfect. Then he waited. The waiting was the hardest part. The anticipation gnawed at him, a mix of anxiety and grim satisfaction. Days bled into a week. He almost started to believe she wouldn't come, that his elaborate plan was in vain. But then, one Tuesday morning, as he was making his coffee, he saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of his peripheral vision. A familiar, slightly hunched figure, her floral sun hat a grotesque beacon pushing through the gap in the hedge. Karen. His heart hammered. He froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. She paused, glancing around, a furtive, almost predatory glint in her eyes. Her usual swagger was muted by the need for stealth. She stepped onto his property, her worn sneakers crunching softly on the decorative gravel he'd laid. She moved with an almost comical caution, head swiveling, eyes darting from side to side. She made her way towards the raised platform near the oak tree, her usual shortcut towards the bird bath she'd once claimed was attracting too many squirrels to her yard. He watched, breathless, from his kitchen window, the morning light, reflecting off the glass, shielding him from view. He could see her mouth moving, likely muttering some imagined grievance. She was almost there. One more step. Her right foot landed squarely on the disguised pressure plate. There was a soft, almost inaudible whir as the mechanism engaged. Simultaneously, the birdhouse camera blinked green. Karen, oblivious, took another step, then frowned. She felt a subtle shift, a barely perceptible tremor beneath her feet. Before she could fully register it, a series of small, nearly invisible hoses, disguised as plant stems within the decorative planters, simultaneously fired. Not water. Oh, no, far more cunning. From the planters around her, a fine, glittering mist erupted. It wasn't just any mist. It was a cloud of ultra-fine, bright, holographic glitter, iridescent, impossible to remove without significant effort, and designed to cling to every surface. And mixed within that glitter, activated by the mist, was a powerful, long-lasting, utterly distinctive scent. Not unpleasant, but so overwhelmingly sweet and floral, like 1,000 honeysuckles blooming at once that it was impossible to ignore. A scent that would follow her, clinging to her clothes, her hair, her skin, for days. Karen gasped, her eyes widening as the glittering cloud enveloped her. She shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and fury, as the shimmering particles adhered. Karen Albright stood shimmering, a human kaleidoscope in Ethan's backyard, the air around her thick with the cloying sweetness of 1,000 honeysuckles. The iridescent glitter clung to every fiber of her floral sun hat, her sensible blouse, her ill-fitting trousers, and even to the fine, sparse hairs that framed her furiously red face. She looked less like a neighbor and more like a disgruntled pixie caught mid-flight, a spectacle of unexpected, embarrassing luminescence. The initial shriek had been purely instinctual, a guttural expulsion of shock. Now, as the reality of her predicament sank in, it morphed into a choked gurgle of outrage. Her hands, covered in a fine sheen of glitter, flew to her face, attempting to wipe away the offending sparkle, only to spread it further, creating streaks of rainbow across her cheeks and forehead. The scent, previously an almost pleasant, if overwhelming sweetness, now felt like a noxious gas, burning in her nostrils, clinging to the back of her throat. "What in God's name?" she croaked, her voice hoarse with disbelief, staring at the innocent-looking planters that had betrayed her. Her eyes, wide and bewildered, darted around, searching for a culprit, a sign, anything to explain this glittering aromatic assault. Her gaze finally settled on the birdhouse nestled in the oak tree, an object she had previously dismissed as quaint, now seeming to pulse with a malevolent electronic eye. A tiny, almost imperceptible red light blinked. Panic began to mix with her fury. She wasn't just covered in glitter, she was caught. And that camera. A cold dread snaked through her gut. Karen, for all her bluster, was intensely image-conscious within her narrow, self-defined social circle. To be seen like this, recorded like this, the thought sent a fresh wave of heat through her already flushed face. She backed away from the treacherous platform, stumbling over her own feet, her glitter-encrusted sneakers kicking up small clouds of dust that shimmered like fairy dust. Every movement released more of the sickeningly sweet scent, following her like a guilty conscience. Her carefully constructed facade of respectable indignation, the very foundation of her neighborhood tyranny, was crumbling under a deluge of sparkle and floral perfume. Ethan, watching from his kitchen window, felt a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It wasn't a malicious grin, but one of profound, weary satisfaction. He watched as Karen made a beeline for the gap in the hedge, moving with an urgency she usually reserved for gossip sessions or urgent phone calls to the homeowners association. She practically dove through the opening, tearing a snag in her blouse on a thorny branch, a small price to pay for escape. He heard the faint distant slam of her back door. Silence descended on his garden once more, but it was a different kind of silence this time. A victorious, unburdened silence, punctuated only by the chirping of birds, seemingly unfazed by the recent glitter bomb. Ethan took a deep, cleansing breath, the aroma of his coffee suddenly much more appealing. He retrieved his phone and checked the cloud server. A new file had appeared, neatly time-stamped. Intruder, so 825, 2025, 09, 17, 32.mp4. He tapped on it, and there she was, in glorious high definition, the full spectacle of Karen Albright's glittering comeuppance. He watched it once, twice, a third time, savoring every flustered twitch, every indignant gesture, every desperate swat at the shimmering air. This wasn't just revenge, it was data, undeniable video evidence, and it felt infinitely more satisfying than any screaming match or legal letter could ever have been. He knew Karen wouldn't take this lying down. This wasn't the end. It was merely the opening salvo in a new, perhaps more desperate phase of their silent war. He anticipated the knock on his door, the furious accusations, the demand for an explanation. But for the first time in 2 years, Ethan felt prepared. He had his evidence, his proof, and a calm resolve that had been rekindled by the gleam of holographic glitter. True to form, Karen's wrath was swift and incandescent. Within the hour, a violent banging erupted on Ethan's front door, rattling the frame. He calmly finished his coffee, took another deep breath, and walked towards the door. He peered through the peephole. She stood there, not quite a human disco ball anymore, but still undeniably spectacularly glittery. Her sun hat was gone, replaced by wildly disheveled hair that shimmered with 1,000 tiny rainbows. Her face was scrubbed raw, patchy with glitter still clinging stubbornly to her eyebrows and the creases around her eyes. The sweet, floral scent preceded her, a fragrant harbinger of her fury. "Ethan Vance, open this door immediately!" Her voice was shrill, amplified by her indignation, and carried easily across the quiet street. He opened the door just enough to slide his lean frame through, blocking most of the entrance. His expression was carefully neutral, a stark contrast to her vibrant rage. "Karen," he said, his voice calm, almost placid. "Is there a problem?" Her jaw dropped, then snapped shut with a visible click. "A problem? A problem, you ask? Look at me!" She gestured wildly at herself, glitter raining down from her fingertips. "I'm covered in whatever this abomination is, and I smell like a cheap perfume factory exploded. What did you do, you deviant?" "Deviant?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes that he quickly suppressed. "Karen, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Were you perhaps in my backyard without my permission again? Don't you dare try to turn this on me!" She shrieked, stepping closer, the sickly sweet scent intensifying. "I merely took a shortcut, as I sometimes do. And then I was ambushed by your glitter bomb. This is illegal. I'll call the police. I'll sue you for assault and battery." "Assault and battery?" Ethan repeated, a note of genuine surprise in his tone. "I assure you, Karen, I've assaulted no one. And I certainly haven't touched you. As for my backyard, it's my private property. I have every right to install whatever deterrence I deem necessary to protect my peace and property from trespassers." "Trespassers?" Her voice cracked with indignation. "I am your neighbor. I have every right to observe, to ensure you're not doing anything untoward." Observing from my property, Karen is still trespassing, Ethan said, his voice firm but not accusatory. He maintained eye contact, refusing to back down. And I have it on good authority that my property is well within its rights to be free from uninvited guests, especially those who tend to take liberties with my garden produce. A vein throbbed visibly in Karen's temple. This is about the zucchini, isn't it? You petty, pathetic little man. 2 years later and you're still stewing. Over a vegetable? It was never about the zucchini, Karen, Ethan said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its earlier placid tone. It was about respect, about boundaries, about my right to feel secure in my own home without you peering over hedges, letting your dog dig up my flowers or, as it turns out, walking onto my property uninvited. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over her glitter-dusted form. And now, it seems, it's about the consequences of those actions. Her eyes narrowed, a flash of genuine fear momentarily eclipsing her rage. Consequences? What consequences? You think this childish prank will scare me? I've dealt with bigger bullies than you, Ethan Vance. I wouldn't call it a prank, Karen, Ethan countered, his voice steady. I'd call it an educational experience, a visual and olfactory reminder of where the property line truly is. He leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though still perfectly audible. And a very well-documented one at that. Karen blinked. Documented? What are you talking about? The birdhouse camera, Ethan said simply, gesturing vaguely towards his backyard without breaking eye contact. It records everything. High definition, time-stamped, and uploaded to the cloud in real time. From the moment you breach the hedge to your, shall we say, rather sparkling departure. Her face went pale, a stark contrast to the rainbow glitter. The fire in her eyes flickered, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The image of the blinking red light, previously dismissed, now replayed in her mind with terrifying clarity. I have the footage, Karen, Ethan continued, his voice devoid of triumph, merely stating a fact. Every second of your unauthorized entry, and your subsequent transformation. It's all there, clear as day. I'm sure the local police department, or perhaps even the neighborhood watch, would find it quite illuminating, especially considering your history of accidental trespasses and property damage. He watched as the color drained completely from her face. Her shoulders slumped, the frantic energy that had propelled her to his door suddenly deflating. The sweet scent around her suddenly seemed to mock her, a constant, inescapable reminder. You wouldn't, she whispered, her voice barely audible, robbed of its usual power. Wouldn't I? Ethan asked, a single, calm question that hung heavy in the air between them. He let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of his words and the undeniable reality of the glittering evidence to settle. He watched as her eyes darted around, no longer searching for a victim to blame, but for an escape, a way out of this humiliation. But there was none. Not for now. The full weight of what had happened, of what he possessed, crashed down on her. It wasn't just the glitter. It was the proof. The undeniable public evidence that contradicted every indignant protest she might make. She had been caught, red-handed, in a trap she hadn't even known existed, designed. The drawn blinds of Karen Albright's house became a silent, defiant statement to the neighborhood. For 2 full days, the queen of the cul-de-sac remained cloistered, a self-imposed exile punctuated only by the occasional furtive movement of her dog in the backyard. The honeysuckle scent, though fading, was still perceptible to those with a keen sense of smell, and the memory of the glittering apparition and the soot-covered saboteur remained vividly fresh in the collective consciousness of the street. Whispers, once hushed, now carried a note of open amusement and vindication. Ethan Vance, the quiet gardener, had unwittingly become a folk hero. Inside her fortress of shame, Karen seethed. The industrial soot, as Marcus had warned, was a nightmare to remove. She had scrubbed until her skin was raw, dyed her hair twice, and sent her expensive carpet to a specialist cleaner, all while battling the lingering, sickeningly sweet perfume. Every mirror reflected a face that was still faintly glittery, a constant reminder of her utter, spectacular failure. And Marcus Thorne, her supposed digital savior, had not only disappeared, but was now threatening to release the footage himself. The silence from Ethan was the most infuriating aspect. No gloating, no triumphal calls, just the quiet hum of his lawnmower and the sight of him tending his now thriving garden, a picture of serene victory. It was his calm indifference, his absolute lack of a need to rub it in, that truly drove Karen to distraction. He had won, and he knew it, and that was a torment she couldn't endure. She needed a new strategy, one that didn't involve physical trespass or unreliable hired help. This had to be a public campaign, a narrative reversal. She would frame herself as the victim, Ethan as the deranged aggressor. It was her only hope of salvaging her reputation. On the third morning, the blinds of Karen's house finally flew open, bathing her living room in sunlight. She emerged, not in her usual floral attire, but in a severe charcoal gray pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a tight, unforgiving bun. Her face was carefully made up, hiding most of the glitter, but her eyes, though still holding a flicker of past humiliation, burned with renewed purpose. She still carried the faint ghost of honeysuckle, but now it was a scent of war. Her first target, the neighborhood online forum. Within minutes, a new post appeared, titled, "Unacceptable Harassment and Dangerous Tactics by Ethan Vance." The post was a masterpiece of passive aggression and distorted truth. Karen painted a vivid picture of being assaulted by a chemical spray, blinding lights, and a traumatizing siren while merely retrieving a stray golf ball from near Ethan's property line. She accused him of installing illegal surveillance equipment and booby traps designed to intimidate and harm his neighbors. She appealed to the community's sense of safety and demanded immediate action from the Homeowners Association and local authorities. She even included a subtly filtered picture of herself, looking distressed, with a barely visible hint of glitter in her hair, implying she was a victim of a cruel, unprovoked attack. Ethan, sipping his morning coffee, scrolled through the forum, with a growing sense of exasperation, then a slow, knowing smile. He had expected this. Karen was nothing if not predictable. He read through the outraged comments from her usual sycophants, their digital pitchforks already raised. "This is an outrage! Poor Karen!" We knew he was odd with all those plants. Dangerous! Think of the children! He watched the comments flood in, but he also noticed something else. A new wave of more skeptical, even subtly sarcastic responses. A chemical spray? Are we talking about glitter, Karen? I heard a siren, but I also saw a very black figure fleeing from your house, Karen. Was that a stray golf ball, too? Funny. My dog never loses his golf balls on Ethan's side. Must be a special kind of golf ball. The tide of opinion wasn't entirely with her this time. His silent, glitter and soot-based counter-narrative was already at play. Ethan decided not to respond immediately. He had something better. He had the truth, unvarnished and in high definition. He had been waiting for her, to make the first move, to overplay her hand once more, and she had. He composed a short, concise email to Mr. Peterson, the head of the Neighborhood Watch, and to Mrs. Jenkins, the usually impartial chair of the HOA. Attached were two files, Intruders 08 25 2025 09 17 32.mp4 and Saboteurs 08 25 2025 2103 48.mp4. His email simply read, "Dear Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Jenkins, in light of recent concerns raised about my property's security measures, I would like to offer full transparency. Please find attached video documentation of the two unauthorized presence incidents I referenced. As you will see, My systems are entirely non-harmful and serve solely to deter and document trespass. I trust this clarifies any misunderstandings. Sincerely, Ethan Vance. He pressed send, a profound sense of calm washing over him. The ball was now firmly in their court, or rather in the digital ether. The reaction was swift and far-reaching. Mr. Peterson, known for his methodical approach, scheduled an emergency meeting of the neighborhood watch, disseminating the videos to key members beforehand. Mrs. Jenkins, initially sympathetic to Karen's tearful phone call, watched the footage in growing disbelief, her expression shifting from concern to utter shock, then to a tight-lipped disapproval. The videos spread like wildfire through the private neighborhood communication channels. The first video, showing Karen Albright shimmering in glitter, wildly flailing and then scrambling through the hedge, was a revelation. The second, with Marcus Thorne's professional, yet utterly comical, soot-covered flight, was the final nail in the coffin of Karen's victim narrative. The online forum, which Karen had hoped to use as her platform, now turned into a torrent of bewildered, then openly mocking comments. So the chemical spray was glitter, and the illegal surveillance caught her trespassing? That stray golf ball was a full-grown man in black, covered in soot, trying to break his camera. Honestly, Ethan Vance is a genius. Who knew neighborhood disputes could be this entertaining? Justice is a dish best served sparkling and sooty. Karen, watching the forum from behind her drawn blinds, felt her world crumble. Her carefully constructed image, her reign of fear and social control, was dissolving into a digital laughingstock. The few remaining supportive comments were drowned out by a wave of ridicule and derision. The irony was brutal. She had tried to control the narrative, only to have Ethan's silent, undeniable video evidence hijack it completely, turning her into the very villain she had tried to portray him as. Later that afternoon, a knock echoed on Karen's door. It wasn't the police or Marcus Thorne, but Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Jenkins, their faces grim, accompanied by a small delegation of neighborhood watch members. Karen, Mrs. Jenkins began, her voice unusually stern. We need to have a serious discussion. These videos? They paint a very different picture than the one you presented? Karen opened her mouth to protest, to spin another lie, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at their faces, no longer filled with the deference she was accustomed to, but with a mixture of disappointment and thinly veiled contempt. The power had shifted. The tables had turned. And for the first time, Karen Albright felt truly, utterly alone and exposed, not just to Ethan, but to the entire neighborhood she had so tirelessly sought to control. The trap, Ethan realized, had sprung even wider than he'd initially imagined, catching not just the trespasser, but the very foundation of her toxic influence. Part 5 delivers a significant blow to Karen's attempts at reputation repair. Her online smear campaign spectacularly backfires as Ethan releases the irrefutable video evidence, turning the neighborhood against her. What do you think will happen in the emergency meeting with the HOA and Neighborhood Watch? How will Karen respond to this public shaming? Let's explore Part 6 next. Karen broke into my backyard, the trap. Waiting for her was perfect. The silence in Karen Albright's immaculate yet now subtly shimmering home was a brittle thing, stretched taut over her simmering humiliation. The honeysuckle scent, having permeated every pore, every fabric, every strand of her disheveled hair, was a constant cloying reminder of her defeat. She had tried showering, scrubbing her skin until it was raw, but the iridescent glitter seemed to mock her, clinging stubbornly, reappearing in unexpected places, a glint on the bathroom mirror, a sparkle on her freshly laundered towel. The scent, too, lingered, woven into her very being. Her usual afternoon routine, a sacred ritual of neighborhood surveillance and social media critiques, was utterly derailed. How could she possibly show her face at Mrs. Henderson's weekly bridge? Game, smelling like a botanical garden and looking like a rejected prop from a children's glitter factory. The thought alone made her stomach churn with a venomous mix of shame and rage. Ethan Vance. That quiet, unassuming gardener. The petty, pathetic little man, as she'd so casually dismissed him. He had orchestrated this. He had planned it, executed it, and then, with that infuriatingly calm demeanor, presented her with the damning evidence. The camera, the birdhouse, the footage. The implications were catastrophic. Karen paced her living room, each step punctuated by the faint, soft crunch of glitter underfoot. Her mind, usually a well-oiled machine of complaint and accusation, raced in a desperate search for an angle, a loophole, a way to spin this. She was Karen Albright. She didn't get caught. She certainly didn't get humiliated. Her first instinct was to double down, to unleash a storm of legal threats and calls to every conceivable authority. But the memory of Ethan's steady gaze, his quiet declaration about the documented evidence, stopped her cold. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he wasn't bluffing. The birdhouse had blinked. The glitter was undeniable. She had been caught in the act. Then a new, insidious thought began to take root. Damage control. She needed to control the narrative before it spiraled out of her grasp. If the video ever got out, the thought was unbearable. Her social standing, meticulously built on a foundation of gossip and judgment, would crumble. The ladies at bridge would never let her forget it. The homeowners association, where she reigned supreme, would be a hostile territory of whispered snickers. No, this couldn't be allowed to see the light of day. Ethan Vance had to be silenced. She picked up her phone, her glitter-dusted fingers, leaving faint sparkles on the screen. She scrolled through her contacts, bypassing her usual confidants. This required a different kind of expertise. She found the number for Marcus Thorne, a distant cousin who worked in digital solutions, a euphemism, Karen suspected, for less than above-board tech fixes. Marcus, she began, her voice tight with suppressed panic. I have a rather delicate situation. It involves an unsavory neighbor and some highly compromising digital content. She explained the situation, carefully omitting her own trespass and painting Ethan as a vindictive, unstable aggressor who had attacked her with some kind of chemical weapon and then illegally filmed her. Marcus listened, grunting occasionally, the sound of his keyboard clacking faintly in the background. So, you want me to make this footage disappear? Marcus finally asked, a note of detached amusement in his voice. And potentially disable this glitter bomb camera contraption? Precisely, Karen said, relief washing over her. Whatever it takes. And quickly. This cannot become public. It'll cost you, Karen, he warned. Disabling a cloud-based system and a local camera feed and doing it without a trace? That's not small potatoes. Money is no object, she practically hissed. Just get it done, and make sure he can't do it again. Marcus agreed to look into it, promising to send someone over that night to assess the digital landscape. Karen hung up, a flicker of her old confidence returning. This was her forte, manipulating situations, pulling strings from the shadows. Ethan Vance may have won this round, but the game wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ethan, meanwhile, spent a surprisingly peaceful afternoon. He pruned his roses, feeling a lightness in his step that hadn't been there in years. The memory of Karen's glittering, defeated retreat was a balm to his soul. He had checked the camera feed several times, confirming the footage was secure, the system still active. He wasn't naive enough to think this was over, but he had bought himself some breathing room. Later that evening, as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ethan settled onto his porch swing with a book. The air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine from his trellis, a welcome contrast to the lingering honeysuckle that still permeated the neighborhood air. A subtle but persistent reminder of Karen's earlier escapade. He noticed a dark, nondescript van idling down the street, its windows tinted. It seemed out of place in their quiet, residential cul-de-sac. He paid it little mind, attributing it to a late delivery or an unfamiliar contractor. But then he saw it again, slowly cruising past his house, pausing briefly before continuing, down the block. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. As darkness fully descended, a figure emerged from the shadows near the hedge that separated his yard from Karen's. This wasn't Karen. This person was lean, dressed in dark clothing, moving. With a silent, almost professional stealth, they carried a small tactical backpack and what looked like a pair of specialized shears. Ethan froze. His book dropped to his lap with a soft thud. He watched, breath held, as the figure approached the hedge, not near Karen's usual entry point, but further down, where the foliage was thicker, providing more cover. This wasn't a casual trespasser. This was deliberate. The figure knelt, inspecting the base of the hedge, then produced a small illuminated device, its beam sweeping across the ground. They were searching for something. For the trap. A cold certainty settled over Ethan. Karen wasn't just fuming, she was retaliating. And she had brought in outside help. He knew his system was well hidden, designed to blend in with the garden. But this person seemed to know what they were looking for. The figure moved with practiced efficiency, their hands working quickly, expertly. They were looking for the pressure plate, for the camera, for any wires that might be exposed. Ethan realized he had underestimated Karen. Her defeat had not broken her. It had simply shifted her strategy. She had gone from public nuisance to covert operator. He slowly, carefully reached for his phone, already navigating to the security camera app. He watched the live feed from the birdhouse camera, seeing the shadowy figure now clearly in its night vision lens. They were close to the oak tree, their face obscured by a hood, but their intent was unmistakable. The figure reached the base of the oak, their gloved hand extending towards the birdhouse. They produced a small, sophisticated tool, its tip glowing, faintly. They were attempting to disable it. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had designed the system to be resilient, but he hadn't anticipated professional saboteurs. He had designed it to catch Karen, not to withstand a targeted attack. Just as the figure's tool made contact with the birdhouse, a faint, almost imperceptible click echoed from within the oak tree. The sound wasn't from the birdhouse. It was from a secondary, much smaller, equally covert device Ethan had installed weeks ago, a backup, a fail-safe, purely for this very contingency, a device designed to trigger if the primary camera was tampered with. The figure stiffened, then cursed, under their breath. They pulled back, their head snapping up, scanning the branches above them. They had heard it too. Suddenly, a blinding, multi-directional strobe light, disguised as an ornamental garden light, flared to life, not just from the birdhouse, but from 3 other strategically placed points around the oak tree. Simultaneously, a deafening siren, pitched to an ear-splitting frequency, erupted, its sound designed to be utterly disorienting and impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a simple alarm. It was a sensory overload, specifically calibrated to be overwhelming. The figure cried out, clutching their head, stumbling backward as the piercing siren tore through the quiet night, and the strobes turned the garden into a dizzying, epileptic nightmare. They were disoriented, blinded, their stealth utterly compromised. Ethan, though prepared, flinched at the sudden onslaught of light and sound. He quickly muted the siren on his phone, focusing on the visual. The figure was thrashing, scrambling, desperate to escape the cacophony. And as the figure tried to bolt back towards the hedge, another even more cunning element of Ethan's backup plan engaged. The ground beneath their feet, near the path they'd just come in on, suddenly gave way slightly. Not a pit, but a cleverly disguised section of loose, ultrafine, incredibly sticky, black industrial-grade soot powder, deployed by another pressure plate near the primary camera. The figure landed in it with a soft poof, kicking up a cloud of black that clung to their clothing, their skin, their hair. The soot, designed for industrial cleaning, was notoriously difficult to remove, especially when agitated. It was dark, indelible, and the complete opposite of glitter. The figure was no longer a shadowy, anonymous operative. They were a flailing, soot-covered, disoriented mess, caught between the strobe lights and the siren, now stained an undeniable, conspicuous black. They fled through the hedge, leaving a trail of black footprints. The piercing wail of the siren had ripped through the suburban quiet like a banshee, followed by a kaleidoscopic burst of strobing lights that painted Ethan's backyard in jarring, fragmented colors. For a full, agonizing minute, the neighborhood had been plunged into an involuntary, chaotic rave before Ethan, with a practiced touch, silenced the cacophony. The abrupt cessation of the noise left a ringing echo in the night and a palpable tension in the air. Windows, previously dark, now glowed with curious faces. Doors creaked open, just a crack, as wary residents peered out, trying to decipher the source of the late-night disturbance. Karen Albright, huddled by her window, watched the spectacle with a growing sense of dread, the lingering honeysuckle scent now mingling with the bitter tang of anxiety. She had been on the phone with Marcus Thorne, her digital solutions cousin, when the siren shrieked. She'd heard his muffled curse, then the line had gone dead. The sight of the strobe lights, the frantic, shadowy figure flailing in Ethan's yard, confirmed her worst fears. Her expensive operative, the solution to her problem, had just become another casualty of Ethan Vance's infuriating ingenuity. A few minutes later, the faint sound of a vehicle speeding away broke the silence. It wasn't the van that had idled earlier, it was something faster, more desperate. She knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that Marcus's man had fled, not only unsuccessful but likely compromised. The front door to Karen's house burst open, and Marcus Thorne, her distant cousin, stumbled in, a vision of bewildered fury. He was no longer the slick, detached tech specialist she had hired. His dark clothing was caked in a fine, clinging layer of black soot, making him look like a chimney sweep who had just wrestled a ghost. His usually neat hair was standing on end, also coated in black, and his eyes, wide with disbelief and irritation, still held the lingering disorientation of the strobes. The cloying scent of honeysuckle, faintly discernible on him, added another layer of absurdity to his appearance. "Karen!" he rasped, his voice raw, his face contorted in a mask of outrage that even the soot couldn't fully obscure. "What in the hell was that? You said it was a simple camera. You said it was just a glitter bomb. This wasn't a job for a digital solutions guy. This was a war zone." Karen recoiled, a gasp catching in her throat. The sheer, indelible blackness of him was shocking. She could already picture the neighbors, peeking through their curtains, witnessing this soot-covered apparition storming out of her house. Her meticulously crafted image, already tarnished by glitter, was now being actively, aggressively destroyed. "Marcus, you're covered," she stammered, pointing a trembling, glitter-dusted finger. "Covered? I'm practically a walking ink spill," he roared, swatting futilely at his shoulder, only to spread the soot further. "And the noise! The lights! I thought I was having a seizure! And what is this smell?" He gestured wildly around her house, taking in the faint glitter trails she'd left. "And it smells like you in here, too. What kind of sick prank is that man pulling?" Karen felt a fresh wave of panic. Her attempt at covert action had not only failed, but had brought a highly visible, highly agitated, soot-covered witness directly to her doorstep. This was worse than just the footage. This was a public spectacle unfolding in real time, right in front of everyone. He has cameras, Marcus, she whispered, her voice barely audible. More cameras, and a backup system. He knew you. We're coming. Marcus stared at her, his anger slowly morphing into a cold, calculating fury. He knew? And you didn't think to mention that, Karen? You hired me to disable a system that was designed to catch me? You jeopardized my operation, my reputation, my sanity for a petty neighborhood feud? It's not petty, Karen wailed, tears beginning to well in her eyes. He's trying to ruin me. He has footage of me in his yard, and now he has footage of you too. And you're a mess. How will you ever get that off? Marcus ignored her pleas. He pulled out his phone, his soot-covered thumb swiping vigorously. I'm cutting ties, Karen, right now. You pay me double for this nightmare, or I take that footage you mentioned and make sure it finds its way to the local news. Don't test me. This isn't my first rodeo with vindictive neighbors, but it's my first rodeo with a glitter soot strobe siren ambush. He turned on his heel, leaving a trail of black footprints on her pristine white carpet, and slammed the door behind him. Karen was left alone, surrounded by the faint shimmer of glitter and the oppressive sweetness of honeysuckle, the acrid scent of Marcus's industrial soot now adding another layer to her personal aroma profile. She sank onto her couch, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking not with grief, but with impotent rage. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone began to buzz. First, a text from Mrs. Henderson, a notoriously nosy neighbor a few houses down. Ethan, dear, is everything all right? We heard quite a commotion. Such bright lights. Then, a call from Mr. Peterson, the head of the neighborhood watch, his voice laced with concern, and a hint of something else, a subtle curiosity. Ethan calmly answered Mr. Peterson's call. Good evening, Mr. Peterson. Yes, everything's quite all right now. Just a minor security test. My new system seems to be working perfectly. Security test? Mr. Peterson's voice was skeptical. Sounded like a full-blown invasion, Ethan. The entire street's lit up like a Christmas tree, and that siren? Are you sure there wasn't a break-in? No break-in, just an unfortunate incident of someone attempting to tamper with my property, Ethan explained, carefully choosing his words. My automated deterrent system engaged. It's quite sensitive to unauthorized presence. He omitted the part about Karen's hired saboteur, choosing to let the neighborhood draw its own conclusions. The soot-covered figure fleeing from Karen's house would speak volumes. Unauthorized presence, you say? Mr. Peterson mused, a thoughtful pause on the line. Well, I suppose it's good to know your security is top-notch, Ethan. Very thorough. There was a new, almost respectful tone in his voice. We all appreciate a vigilant homeowner. Let us know if you need anything. Ethan thanked him, a small smile playing on his lips. He knew exactly what unauthorized presence Mr. Peterson was alluding to. The sight of a figure, fleeing from Ethan's yard and heading directly towards Karen's house, covered in soot and likely reeking of honeysuckle, would not be easily forgotten. The neighborhood gossip mill would be working overtime tonight. He checked the cloud server again. A new file. Saboteur 0825 2025 210348.mp4. He watched it, the figure's stealthy approach, their attempt to disable the birdhouse camera, the sudden blinding strobes, the deafening siren, and then the comical, soot-covered stumble and flight. It was even better than the first video. This footage, too, was undeniable. Ethan knew this would change things. Karen had overplayed her hand, escalating a petty feud into something far more brazen and ultimately far more public. She had exposed her willingness to resort to underhanded tactics, not just to him, but to the entire neighborhood. And she had done it with the most visually and audibly impactful failure imaginable. The next morning, the street was abuzz. Whispers rippled through the sidewalks as neighbors gathered for their morning walks, coffee cups in hand. Mrs. Henderson, usually discreet, was practically bursting with information, though she claimed only to have heard a terrible racket and seen a most peculiar dark shadow near Karen's hedge. Mr. Peterson, ever the community leader, simply nodded knowingly when asked about the previous night's events, hinting at unforeseen security measures and unfortunate consequences for those who disrespect private property. Karen, for the first time in memory, did not emerge from her house. Her blinds remained drawn, her car stayed in the driveway. The usual sounds of her dog barking and her lawnmower roaring were conspicuously absent. A deep, unsettling silence emanated from her property, a stark contrast to the lively if gossipy chatter that filled the rest of the street. Ethan, watering his petunias, now thriving and undisturbed, felt a profound sense of vindication. He had not started this war, but he had certainly dictated its terms. Karen had sought to erase his evidence, to silence him, but instead she had only added more chapters to her growing ledger of public embarrassments. The glitter, the honeysuckle, the soot, the siren, each was a layer of undeniable truth. Meticulously documented, he knew she wouldn't disappear forever. Karen Albright was not a woman who simply vanished, but her power, her influence, her very persona in the neighborhood had taken a catastrophic hit. The fear, the subtle intimidation she had wielded was now replaced by curiosity, pity, and a growing collective amusement. The queen of the cul-de-sac had fallen, not with a bang, but with a glittering, fragrant, soot-covered whimper. And the neighborhood, for the first time in a long time, felt a collective sigh of relief. Ethan had, against all odds, managed to restore a fragile peace, one glitter bomb and soot trap at a time. The real challenge now would be seeing how long this fragile peace and Karen's enforced silence could last. Part 4 definitely ratchets up the consequences for Karen. Her attempt at sabotage backfired gloriously, leaving her operative soot-covered and her reputation further damaged. The neighborhood is buzzing, and Karen is in hiding. Are you curious to see what Karen's next move will be, or how the neighborhood dynamics shift in the wake of her very public?